Do you believe that everything alive can be explained? That everything frightening is just a reflection of what we don't understand? Then maybe you've never been lost in the woods, alone, when silence stops being peaceful and becomes a warning. There is an invisible line that separates nature from what inhabits it, and those who cross that line come back changed, if they come back at all. For centuries, indigenous cultures have warned. Certain creatures are not just myths, they are living warnings. Skinwalkers that hide in the skin of those you love. Wendigos that devour more than flesh. They devour identity, soul, memory. And you know what's most terrifying? Not everyone who sees them dies. Some live and tell, or try to. In this video, you'll dive into 6 real stories, chilling true encounters experienced by ordinary people. People like you and me. Each account is an invitation to question what we think we know and to recognize that fear sometimes is right. It doesn't matter if you're a skeptic or simply curious, these stories will change the way you look at a lonely trail or a whisper in the dark. She was never afraid of the forest. In fact, she walked through it like someone returning home. There was a rhythm, a different way of breathing in there, with the leaves crunching underfoot and the sounds of nature cradling her thoughts. It was just her and Naty, her Siberian husky. On that hike, she repeated almost like a ritual. Each step among the trees was a pause from life, you know? But that afternoon, the silence felt thicker, denser, as if something was watching. And it was. They say those who walk alone in the forest must learn to hear the whispers of the trees. But that day, there were no whispers, only an oppressive, almost deafening silence. Naty stopped running, stood still, her fur bristling, ears alert. That's when the stench came, dense as invisible smoke, a foul smell that clings to your throat and signals what's to come. The forest had stopped breathing. Amid the shadows, she saw it. A tall, very thin silhouette, with crooked antlers sprouting from its head as if the forest itself had birthed it. It was too big to be a deer and too strange to be a man. The skin seemed to drip from the bones, the eyes soulless, just hungry holes. The creature didn't move, but it was alive, and with each passing second it seemed more aware. She felt fear tear through her. She wanted to run, but something inside her froze. Instinct screamed, but the body didn't respond. Naty growled low, eyes fixed on that thing. The woman tried to call the dog, but no sound came out. She had swallowed her own panic. The creature took a step. That's when everything fell apart. The hike became a flight. The sacred turned into a curse. And time stopped in there. The thing made a sound that didn't come from its mouth. It was like it spoke directly into the mind. A blend of mysterious voices, childish and ancient at the same time. She heard words in languages she didn't know, but understood perfectly. You shouldn't be here. The wind suddenly picked up, but it didn't cool. It was a warm wind, full of omens. The creature took another step. Naty barked, and that's when the nightmare truly began. In the attempt to escape, the woman tripped on an exposed root and fell hard. Her knee burst open, blood. Naty ran in circles, trying to protect her owner. But the creature was too close, and when it touched her, even if for a second, a shock ran through the woman's body, as if the trauma had fixed itself into her flesh. The creature was the trauma itself, embodied. A monster that didn't need to kill to leave you broken. The woman managed to get up and run, pulling Naty by the collar. The forest floor seemed endless, like she was trapped in a loop. And the thing followed, slowly, almost effortlessly. At one point, she heard footsteps from the opposite side, but when she turned, no one was there. A trail of bones crossed the path, white and dry. And then more mysterious voices. The forest mocked her. Fear became fuel. She screamed, even knowing no one would hear. The forest muffled the sound, but somehow that scream worked. The creature hesitated, and that was the moment she needed to throw herself down a ravine with Naty. They rolled, hit branches, rocks, mud. Her body ached in places she didn't even know existed, but they were far. For now. Just for now. She managed to leave the forest hours later, exhausted, bleeding, and with Naty limping beside her. The dog's eyes were never the same again. Always alert, as if the creature still lingered. And maybe it did, because that wasn't just a creature. It was a warning, a reminder. And she learned the lesson the hard way. There are indigenous legends that were never meant to be challenged. Since that day, the woman stayed away from trails. She even avoided wooded parks. The smell of wet wood alone would trigger the memory. The trauma was in her like an invisible tattoo, throbbing in silent moments. Sometimes she'd wake up to the sound of those voices in her head. Other times, to the image of those antlers appearing through the branches. She was never the same again. Naty aged differently, more skittish, quieter. The animal instinct that once served to play and explore now turned to protect and avoid. She reacted to corners of the house no one else noticed, barked at the dark, whimpered at the wind. The woman came to trust that instinct more than her own logic. After all, it was the dog who tried to warn her, before the supernatural came to collect the price of her boldness. And if you think this is all exaggerated, that's fine. Those who haven't seen, doubt. But don't ignore the signs in the forest. If the sound suddenly disappears, if the birds go silent, if the stench of rot appears, turn back, no matter how far you've walked. And if you see something with antlers among the trees, don't stop to look, because the worst part isn't seeing the creature. It's when it sees you. Some people trust GPS more than their own dog, not her. Since she was little, she learned that when an animal suddenly stops playing, something is wrong. And Naty was never wrong. The dog sniffed the air, took 2 steps back, and growled softly, as if she knew that it wasn't just a bad smell. It was a sign, a warning. And the woman, even without understanding why, stopped too. The stench of rot came like a wave. It wasn't natural. It wasn't the smell of a dead animal. It was like flesh that should never have existed, something outside the cycle of life. Naty's body arched, the fur on her back bristling. She sniffed frantically, trying to identify where it came from. Her instincts screamed loudly, but humans still doubt too much what they can't explain. That's when it appeared. The creature. There was something in its eyes that resembled hunger, but an ancestral hunger. A tall, deformed creature with irregular antlers and dragging steps as if every movement defied the logic of the body. It didn't run. It didn't need to. It was just there, present, imposing terror. Naty began to move sideways, guarding her owner, staring fixedly at the monster. The forest seemed to have stopped to watch. Not a single leaf moved, not even the wind dared to pass through that scene. The woman felt her chest tighten, as if fear itself had turned into weight. And then came the sound. Not from a mouth, but from the mind. The creature spoke directly into her thoughts, with overlapping mysterious voices, mixing laments, threats, and memories that didn't belong to her. The woman stepped back slowly, without taking her eyes off the creature. Naty growled like a wolf, baring her teeth, but it was clear. She was scared too. It was that pure, instinctive fear, only felt when danger is older than time itself. The creature didn't speed up. It just followed, leaving behind a trail of bones, dry, cracking under its feet. With each step, the woman felt as if the forest changed shape. The trail she knew was no longer the same. The paths tangled, the trees seemed to bend, as if nature itself had been overtaken by that presence. And Naty, once so brave, began to whimper, backing away with her tail between her legs. The woman held the leash tightly, trying not to tremble. She thought about running, but something inside told her that running would be worse. The creature seemed to feed on fear, on sweat, on trembling, on the panicked gaze. Naty stopped and barked once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The creature responded with a dry sound, like branches snapping from within. That's when they started to run. Without thinking, just run. The forest became a labyrinth. Every rock seemed new, every branch seemed placed there on purpose. The stench of rot continued, dense, sticky. The woman slipped, scraped her arms, fell onto damp leaves. Naty came back, licked her, pulled, insisted. That dog was more than an animal. She was a guide, a guardian. And that night, she was the only thing between the woman and the creature. In the middle of the escape, the woman looked back for a second, and that second was enough to see the monster had stopped, but not because it was tired. It was watching, like a camouflaged hunter, like someone who knows you'll return. The creature's eyes burned in the dark, and the antlers moved with the wind, but the body didn't. A living paradox, and terrifying. She and Naty managed to leave the forest, but the world outside seemed smaller after that. More fragile. The woman began paying more attention to the signs. When Naty growled, she stopped. When Naty wouldn't enter a place, she backed off too. She understood that instinct is more reliable than any logical explanation, and that there are monsters that don't need witnesses to exist. Sometimes Naty would stare at nothing and bark. Sometimes she cried in the middle of the night. The woman started getting chills during those moments, as if the stench of rot returned through memories. She knew. Deep down, she knew. That creature still walked around, lurking where human eyes can't reach. And Naty felt it first. Always first. And if one day you're on a trail with your dog and he suddenly stops, staring into the woods with a frozen body, don't insist on continuing. Turn back. Get out of there. Because sometimes what seems like just a shadow among the trees may be the supernatural approaching. And when it gets close, the forest is no longer yours. They say certain traumas fade with time, but that's only for those who've never seen reality distorted before their own eyes. The woman clearly remembered the voice that slid into her mind, soundless yet heavy. It was the creature invading her thoughts, whispering as if it had known her all along. There was no escape from that contact. It was as if fear itself had developed a voice, and she responded, even without wanting to. The creature's communication wasn't like that of a human being. It didn't use words, but concentrated emotions. Pain, thirst, hunger, and ancestral hunger. Every time the woman tried to disconnect, the creature tightened that invisible bond. There was no way to escape with the whole body if the mind was still trapped. She heard the mysterious voices even after running for miles, as if the monster had lodged itself in her memory. During the escape, Naty was hit. Not by claws, not by bites, but by a gaze. The creature didn't need to touch, it only needed to see her. And the dog fell to her side, howling as if something inside her had been torn. The woman carried her in her arms, even with her own knees wounded, with labored breath and blurred vision. It was survival instinct. It was love. And it was also despair. They passed through terrain that no longer seemed like part of the same forest. Hidden holes, treacherous roots, cliffs disguised under dry leaves. The woman stumbled so many times she stopped feeling pain in her legs. The body moved by reflex alone. Naty whimpered softly. Every sound from the dog was a reminder. If they stopped, they would die there. But it wasn't just the physical that was breaking. It was something deeper. The forest seemed to push them. Branches scratched as if they had a will of their own. Stones slipped underfoot like disguised traps. The creature no longer appeared, but the stench of rot persisted. It was on her, on them, inside the nose, the throat, embedded. It was as if the creature had left an invisible mark, an anchor between her world and the supernatural. When they finally reached a rural road, the woman collapsed on the gravel. Blood, mud, sweat, the whole body a map of survival. An old truck driver stopped, helped, took them to the nearest hospital, but even after stitching the cuts and wrapping the bones, no one could stitch what had broken in her mind. And Naty, even healed on the outside, never played again. The woman had nightmares for weeks. She woke up with the feeling that the creature was in the room, whispering. Sometimes she saw the antlers emerging from the shadows of the curtain. The psychologist said it was trauma. She said it was truth, because it wasn't just fear. It was as if the creature had left a copy of itself inside the woman, like a constant, silent presence, like an indigenous legend that refuses to die. Naty began to avoid places with trees. She even avoided plush toys that resembled deer. She cried at high-pitched sounds, grew restless at night noises. The woman came to understand the dog's trauma wasn't any less. It was a mirror of her own. Two marked survivors. And there was one cruel detail, only they remembered what really happened. The others just doubted. For months, the woman tried to find something about what she had seen. She researched monsters, legends, supernatural encounters. That's when she found the names: Wendigo, Skinwalker, ancestral stories, passed on in whispers. Creatures born from cold, from despair, from soul corruption. Creatures that hide in forests. Creatures that devour not only flesh, but also sanity. She clung to candles, crystals, protections. She placed salt at the doors, hung amulets in the windows. Read about native prayers and old healers, all in search of a shield against what she still felt nearby. It was survival, yes, but it was also spiritual resistance, because certain things aren't healed with time. They're healed with faith, with ritual, with fire. Time passed, but the scars never disappeared. The woman still walked with a slight limp, and Naty still stared into nothing now and then, as if she saw something no one else could see. Sometimes, in dreams, they were back in that part of the forest, standing before the creature. But now, the woman knew what it was. She knew that fear has a form and a name. And if you think all this is an exaggeration, well, maybe it's better to keep thinking that. Because the day you smell rot and hear voices coming from nowhere, it might already be too late. And the trauma? Oh, the trauma goes far beyond what can be seen with the eyes. It goes to places even science doesn't dare to touch. Some people think the forest is a neutral place, but those who walk alone in it often find out that's not quite true. This new narrator, let's call him Elias, was a simple man used to silence. He liked trails, the sound of his own footsteps, and the wind through the pines. But over time, he realized that not all silence is peace. Sometimes silence is a warning, a kind of fear whispered by nature. The first times were just discomfort, that feeling of being followed, you know? A chill without reason, instinct saying, don't go there, even when everything looks safe. On one of those walks, Elias noticed there were no birds singing, no insects, not even the buzzing of bees. The forest was mute, oppressively quiet. It was as if time had stopped, as if the place was rejecting his presence. Then came the signs. A dead deer, eyes open and body intact, but without viscera, as if something had chosen what to take. Another day, footprints around the tent, too big for any animal he knew. They looked human, but with claws, and a smell, strong, a stench of rot which he tried to ignore. But it lingered, embedded in memory like smoke that never dissipates. Once, he stopped to rest on a fallen log. The wind blew softly, but brought with it mysterious voices, meaningless words like a distant lament. Elias froze, looked around, but no one was there. And even so, he swore something was watching him. The forest, once familiar, now felt like a dark stage where he was the only one without a script, and he felt he wasn't welcome. Nights were even worse. Silence became a scream. The sounds of the forest seemed distorted, as if someone or something was trying to mimic them grotesquely. One time, he heard what sounded like his own voice calling his name from within the woods. He didn't answer. Never answer. That's something the old camouflaged hunters in the region always said. If you hear your name in the woods, run. Elias started sleeping with a dagger by his side. Not that he thought he could fight whatever it was. It was more symbolic, a way to try to maintain control, a protection ritual. He began lighting candles before entering the trails like he had seen in a documentary about indigenous legends. They said light scared off the supernatural. But what do you do when even the light refuses to stay lit? Once, walking through a stretch he knew well, Elias found a trail of bones. Small ones, like rabbits or squirrels, arranged in a spiral, like a mark. Naty would have sniffed out the danger there. He simply knelt, ran his fingers over the bones, and felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just the scene, it was the energy. Something in that place said, "You've crossed the line." Here begins their territory. Even on the sunniest days, Elias began to feel cold in the forest. A cold that came from within, that settled into the bones. And then the shadows seemed to stretch too far, covering the path even when the sun was still high. The forest seemed to want to hide something, or protect, or imprison. And him? He kept coming back, as if searching for answers or forgiveness. There was something in that place that stirred something in him. It was a fear that wasn't his, you know? As if the very ground was loaded with the trauma of others, those who came before and never returned. He began writing a journal, recording everything, every whisper, every shadow, every piece of meat he found strangely stacked. It was like putting together clues of a macabre puzzle. Elias found symbols carved into the trees, ancient markings that didn't seem human. Some resembled hands, others looked like antlers. Antlers drawn with blades. He took photos, but they never turned out right, always blurry. As if the creature itself didn't want to be documented. And he knew. Somewhere between reality and myth, a monster was watching. One day he crossed paths with another hiker, an older man, hard-faced, tired eyes. They exchanged few words, but the old man said something he never forgot. Some places have owners, and you're walking in their living room. That's when Elias began to understand that the discomfort wasn't psychological, it was spiritual. It was a primal instinct saying, stop. But stopping is hard when you feel like you're too close to discovering something no one else has seen. Elias keeps going back, even knowing the risk, even knowing the next whisper might be the last. The forest called him, and he answered. And deep down, maybe everyone who walks alone ends up hearing that call. Some resist, Others disappear. There are things we see out of the corner of our eyes, but that disappear as soon as we look directly at them. Elias started noticing this on his recent hikes. Shadows between the trees, figures that seemed human but didn't move like one, camouflaged, motionless, watching. He tried to ignore it, to tell himself it was just the light playing, but deep down he knew that wasn't a reflection. It was a presence, and it was intentional. He walked slowly, alert, but never silent enough. He felt as if every branch snapping beneath his feet gave away his location. The forest seemed alive, as if conspiring. The wind blew in opposite directions, disrupting the trail, and then came the voices. Not loud, not direct. Murmurs, indecipherable. Sometimes they sounded like children playing, other times like muffled crying, mysterious voices from another time. Once he stopped to rest, sat on a rock and closed his eyes for a few seconds. When he opened them, there was a figure there, among the trunks, still, covered in leaves and mud, almost invisible. He didn't know if it was a skinwalker, a camouflaged hunter, or something worse. But the eyes were too human for a beast, and too inhuman for a man. The figure vanished the second Elias blinked. From then on, the days became stranger. The forest didn't just reject his presence, it seemed to push him out. Paths that once led to clearings now ended in swamps. Trails disappeared out of nowhere. The compass spun endlessly. Elias began to feel a kind of silent panic, as if he were being surrounded not by a being, but by a force. Something that didn't want to hurt him immediately, but to disorient him. The voices became clearer, but no more understandable. It was as if they spoke in a broken language, made of organic noises. They had human tones, but were torn, malformed. Sometimes they repeated sounds Elias had made, his own whistle, his own cough. It was as if they were imitating, testing, trying to understand how to seem human. And that chilled his spine. Elias started walking with his ears sharp, trying to identify patterns. But everything was chaos, and not a natural chaos, a calculated one. As if every sound was placed to confuse. The forest echoed itself. When he tried to go back, he ended up in the same spot. An invisible circle. The trees, the smells, even the insects seemed to repeat like a broken record. The forest was becoming more and more a living trap. The trunks seemed to close off paths that were once clear. The sunlight, when it appeared, only revealed more shadows. Elias felt his eyes dry, his heart racing, his muscles tense. It was the kind of fear you don't scream, the kind you swallow, the kind that becomes part of your body. Fear of something faceless, nameless, but there, always there. One night he camped near a small spring. Everything seemed calm, but in the middle of the night he woke up to voices around him. They weren't speaking to him, but about him, as if they were discussing what to do, and the whispers came from all directions. Elias remained still, eyes open, staring at the tent ceiling. The forest was alive, and he in there was just another piece. The next morning he found handprints around the tent, some large, others small, like a child's, but all had fingers that were too thin, too long. The feeling was clear. It was testing the limits, playing with him. Elias understood that fleeing wasn't enough. He had to understand what the forest wanted, what it protected, or what it kept locked away. He began to think about everything he had read. Wendigo, Skinwalker, forest spirits. Indigenous legend always pointed to a broken balance, someone or something that had crossed the line. And now, he himself seemed to be watched as if he were the anomaly, as if he were the invader. And the forest judged him in silence. Little by little, Elias began to lose track of time. Days felt longer, nights eternal. His body ached even without effort. His eyes grew heavy. He heard footsteps when there was no ground, saw antlers among the trees that didn't belong to any known animal. A smell of rot came and went like a breeze, and every time he sensed it, fear grew like a seed. And if you think the forest is just a place to breathe fresh air, think twice. Some places breathe you back, and sometimes in the middle of the trail, when everything seems too quiet, you may notice eyes watching through the leaves, camouflaged, almost human, but not quite. There was something wrong with that stretch of forest, and Elias knew it. From the first step, the ground felt too soft. The wind made the branches move in a strange rhythm, like a poorly rehearsed dance. He felt his heart beating out of sync, an instinct he couldn't explain. That's when he noticed the figure. A man, standing still in the middle of the woods, almost invisible. camouflaged clothes, a body too motionless. But the eyes were wide open. The figure looked like a hunter. Torn clothes, worn boots, but no weapon in sight. Elias tried to start a conversation, but got no response. Not even a gesture, not even a blink. Just a stare that cut through the silence like an old knife. They stayed like that for long, heavy seconds. Then, without warning, the man slowly turned and disappeared among the trees, without making a sound, as if the ground didn't exist beneath his feet. Elias's heart raced. He tried to follow the trail, but there was no trail. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. As if the figure had dissolved into the forest, and then the silence grew heavier. That wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that doesn't embrace, it repels. An oppressive silence. The forest, once again, felt alive, and Elias sensed he had crossed an invisible line. Hours later, as the sun began to set, he heard a voice. Low, familiar. It was his mother's voice, who had died years ago, calling his name Hifidega in the way only she used to when she wanted his attention. Elias, come here, my son. The voice came from deep within the woods, sweet, full of affection. And that was the most terrifying part, because it couldn't be real. And yet, he believed it for a second. He took a few steps forward, almost without thinking. But he stopped. Something in the tone was wrong. It was similar, but not the same, like a distorted recording, like an echo of something that never truly existed. And then the voice repeated, exactly the same tone, same pause, as if it were being played back. That wasn't his mother. It was a creature imitating her, a skinwalker, an imposter. Elias's mind went into conflict. Emotion pulled one way, instinct the other. He remembered old stories, creatures that took on familiar voices to lure victims, mysterious voices that seduce before they kill. He backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, and then he saw it. Between two trees, a form was moving, humanoid but deformed, like a melted puppet trying to look like a person. The creature had arms that were too long, a hunched back, a tilted head. The eyes were in the wrong place, and the mouth was far too wide. Even without moving its lips, the voice kept coming out. Elias, come here, my son. A third repetition, exactly the same. He knew, in that instant, he was facing something ancient, something that knew humans, that studied them, that imitated them with terrifying precision. Elias ran. Didn't think. His body took over and launched down the trail. The sound of the creature faded behind him, but the fear remained. He stumbled, fell, got back up, didn't stop. He smelled rot in the air, stronger with each step, as if the forest itself had been infected by that thing. And for a moment, he thought the trees were watching too. They knew. They allowed it. When he finally reached an open field, he dropped to his knees. The starry sky felt distant, like a false ceiling. And even there, far from the shadow of the trees, he still felt the presence. That thing had touched something inside him. A kind of trauma that doesn't heal with time, but with distance, with denial. Elias didn't want to remember the twisted mouth, nor his mother's voice coming from that thing. In the days that followed, he couldn't listen to old family recordings without feeling nauseous. Even the sound of audio messages on his phone made him uneasy. The creature had left an invisible mark, a kind of broken code. Something inside him said that if he returned to that forest, the creature would call him again, and maybe next time the voice would come from another familiar face. Maybe his father, a friend, a brother. He began researching everything he could about mimicking entities, found accounts of other people who had heard dead relatives in the forest. Many never came back. Others went mad. The elders called them Skinwalkers. Others said they were Wendigos, creatures hungry not just for flesh, but for memories, for identity. They want to look like humans until they take their place. And if one day you're in the forest and hear someone calling your name, even if it's a familiar voice, even if it sounds like someone you love, don't answer. Never answer, because it might not be who you think it is. It might be a monster, hungry, with wrong eyes and a mouth far too wide, ready to wear your skin like an old coat. No one believes you when you come back from the forest saying you saw a monster. People laugh, say it was the wind, the lack of food, the exhaustion. Elias was tired of it. Every time he tried to explain what he saw, the eyes, the voices, the smell, he always heard the same thing: you were dreaming. But he hadn't dreamed. Not with that clarity, not with that trauma. It was in him, rooted. He told a friend who replied sarcastically, maybe it was just an oversized deer. Elias thought about the antlers, the twisted legs, the mouth that spoke without moving. That wasn't an animal, and not human either. It was a creature that defies explanation. But how do you convince someone of that? It's like trying to prove you felt a chill, or that you heard a thought that wasn't yours. Impossible to measure with human rulers. He tried writing on an online forum, told everything, every detail. Some mocked, others called him crazy. But one or two replied differently. It happened to me, too. I saw something similar. Then he understood. The world is full of silent survivors, marked people like him, walking around with a lost look and fear in their bones. Listens. But no one listens. No one wants to listen. The pain, it was the loneliness of not being taken seriously. The cognitive dissonance hit hard. Part of him said he had lived something real. Another part, bombarded by the disbelief of others, questioned everything. What if I really went insane? But then the stench of rot would return in flashes. The sound of the false voice echoed in the shower. And he knew it was too real to be imagined. He talked to his sister, a practical, skeptical woman. She listened, tried to be respectful, but in the end said, maybe it's a good idea for you to talk to a therapist. He smiled, but inside he broke. It wasn't support. It was judgment disguised as care. Elias just wanted validation, someone to say, I believe you. Not out of pity, but because they too had felt the forest floor pulse like a strange heart. Elias even tried therapy. The psychologist listened, took notes, asked questions. At first, he thought about opening up, but stopped when she suggested he might be using the creature as a projection of past trauma. That didn't help. He didn't want to be analyzed. He wanted to be understood. Because the fear he carried wasn't symbolic, it was physical. It was a trail of bones he still saw when he closed his eyes. It was during one of those sleepless nights that he decided to return to the forest, not to challenge it, but to remember. He took with him a camera, a recorder, and an indigenous amulet he found in a spiritual market. He did it not to convince others, but to convince himself. If he filmed it, maybe he could free himself. But deep down, he knew that thing didn't let itself be captured so easily. The supernatural has its rules. When he returned, he stood for hours at a spot where he had once felt the presence. Nothing happened. The wind blew, the birds sang. It was as if the forest mocked him now. Oh, so you want proof? Want to show them? The creature didn't appear, but he knew it was there. Knew because, after some time, the forest grew quiet again. And the quiet was the sign. Elias understood that he no longer needed proof. He needed peace. The creature didn't physically follow him after that, but it stayed in his mind. In little things. In the static of the radio, in the reflection of a store window at night, a trauma disguised in the everyday. And the greatest pain was pretending everything was fine when inside, he was still running from it. He spoke little about the subject, only with people who noticed the distant look. People who asked differently, not what happened, but do you still feel it? And it was in those conversations, those rare connections, that he found relief, because those who know, even without needing to say it. And among those who don't, there's no explanation enough. The creature may be supernatural, but the feeling it leaves is very human. Loneliness, anguish, doubt. The monster Elias saw hides in the trees, but its echo lives in the thoughts. And the greatest challenge is not surviving the forest. It's surviving what it does to your mind. When no one believes, when everyone says it was just your imagination, when you start to doubt yourself. And if someday you feel something looking at you from within the woods, trust that more than the laughter of those who've never been there. Because sometimes a monster's greatest power is convincing the world that it doesn't exist. Every family has those stories. No one knows whether they're true or inventions of creative uncles. In Ismail's family, it was the legend of the wood beast, as his grandfather called it. A tall being with hollow eyes, twisted antlers, and the smell of something rotten. It only appeared in the forest near the old great-grandparents' house, they said, but no one took it too seriously. Until that Thanksgiving holiday. Until the kids decided to explore the woods. It was a warm November afternoon. The whole family gathered, laughter on the porch, the smell of turkey in the air, children running through the trees as if they owned the world. Ismail, then 11, led the group. He wanted to show the younger cousins the trail to the dry lake, a place that, according to Grandpa, should be avoided. There's something there that remembers who sees it, he used to say. But no one listens to old folks when the video game is far away. They entered the woods without telling anyone. 3 boys, 2 girls, all with flashlights and cookies in their pockets. The forest was too quiet, as if the sounds had been left behind. It was little Louisa who spoke first. "What's that smell?" It was strong, sweet, and rotten at the same time, like spoiled fruit mixed with meat. Ismail tried to laugh, but his nose burned too. That was different. That was a warning. They kept going anyway until they came upon a clearing. And there, among the twisted trunks, it was. A tall figure, still, with antlers coming out of its head. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But the eyes were those of a hungry beast. They didn't blink. The children froze. The youngest, Vinicius, fell down and began to cry, but his crying seemed to be swallowed by the forest, as if sound was forbidden there. Ismail pulled the others by the hand and started walking backward, slowly, like he'd seen in monster movies. "Don't run. Don't make noise." The creature didn't advance, but it seemed to breathe. Its chest rose and fell in a strange rhythm, as if it had multiple hearts, and the stench of rot grew stronger with each step. When they finally left the clearing, they ran, like they had never run before. Back at the house, no one could speak. Dirty, breathless, wide-eyed. Ismail's aunt thought it was just mischief, but Grandpa didn't. He looked at the kids and simply said, "So he's still there." That sentence silenced the room. For the first time, the adults seemed to take the legend seriously. Grandpa told them in a low voice that he had also seen it as a child, that he ran, survived, but never forgot. The family had always had that haunted side, always connected to the forest. The great-grandfather was a lumberjack, the great-grandmother a midwife and healer. The elders spoke of creatures that live among the branches, of indigenous legends that mingled with European myths. The wood beast was just a name given by those too scared to call it Wendigo or Skinwalker. And now, it had returned. In the following days, Ismail had nightmares. He dreamed of the forest calling his name, of antlers scratching the window, of the trail of bones he later saw near the fence. He started carrying salt in his pocket, as Grandpa instructed. "It's protection," he said. And he lit a white candle every night before sleeping. It didn't matter if he believed or not. It was instinct. It was survival. The children started drawing the creature, each in their own way, but all with antlers, hollow eyes, and that thing no one could explain properly, as if the monster was in the strokes. Louisa's mother tore up the drawings and threw them away. "This attracts," she said, without explaining further. But it was too late, because those who see the monster carry it, not in the eyes, but in the memory. Grandpa, with his days numbered, finally decided to tell everything, that his brother never came back from the forest, that they only found the hat, and near it, deep marks in the ground, like footprints of something that walked with feet and hooves, and that he himself, years later, saw the creature watching from afar in the middle of a trail, a camouflaged hunter, always watching, never attacking, as if waiting for the right moment. From that holiday on, the family avoided the forest. They sold the property, stopped having big gatherings, but the silence between them only grew. It was as if everyone knew something had returned, and maybe had never left. The monster now lived in the family stories, but also in the nightmares. And from time to time, it called again. And if you think legends are nothing more than campfire tales, think about how many times you've heard a grandfather warn, "Don't go that way." Sometimes the old man isn't trying to scare you, he's trying to save you. After that Thanksgiving, the family tried to move on. They made promises not to bring it up again, to keep the children away from the forest, to focus on the good things. But monsters, Bruno, monsters feed on silence, and silence had reigned for years. It was only when the aunts decided to revive the old nighttime games in the backyard that the memory returned, not as a recollection, but as a presence. The idea was just to play hide and seek, like in the old days. Laughter, weak flashlights, music from the kitchen spilling through the windows. The kids were older now, but the women in the family wanted to recapture a bit of the old lightness. But that night, no one laughed for long. The air changed, grew thicker, stiller, and then the porch light flickered, just once. But it was enough. Ismail was there. Now an adult, but still with that same chill in his spine he felt when he saw antlers among the trees. He wasn't part of the game, just watching. He was the first to notice one of the women, cousin Bianca, staring into the woods. Her face frozen, eyes wet. When he approached and asked what it was, she whispered, "He's there." There was no need to ask who, just one look, and yes, he was. Standing between two trees with antlers, wide arms, a body far too long to be human, shadows hiding the details. The others began to notice, one by one, falling silent, pointing. Some cried without knowing why. Others tried to rationalize. It must be a fallen tree. But no one believed their own lie. The creature didn't move, but it was as if it absorbed all attention, as if every cell in the body was drawn to that dark spot between the trunks. Bianca's voice trembled. He called me, used my mother's voice, and then the panic set in, because it was no longer legend, no longer a grandfather's memory. It was real. It was there. And they all saw it together, with no possible explanation. One of the older aunts fell to her knees, praying aloud, mixing Spanish and Latin. The youngest cousin vomited. And Ismail? He just stared, frozen, as if seeing it again was worse than any theory, because now the creature wasn't just a memory. It was a cycle, an inheritance, a monster that didn't forget faces, that collected names, that returned to haunt generations. The party ended there. No one wanted dessert. No one slept in that house that night. Each one gathered their children, their bags, their fears, and left in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any scream. The creature didn't need to attack. Just existing was enough to break everything, because real monsters don't tear flesh, they tear structures, relationships, trust. In the following days, none of the women could clearly explain what they felt. Some said they saw the monster smile, but with the mouth in the wrong place. Others swore they heard the names of everyone there, whispered like a profane prayer. And all of them, without exception, smelled it. That stench of rot, as if the creature had rubbed itself on them. Like a mark, like a seal. The family never celebrated the holiday the same way again. They canceled future gatherings, sold the house, cut contact with some relatives. The trauma split generations. The younger ones didn't want to hear about it. The older ones now believed. Ismail began writing everything down, keeping records. He wanted to leave a warning, not to convince, but to protect, because it would return. It always does. They later discovered that in the past, another woman in the family had disappeared in that forest, a young woman in 1923. She was never found. They said she ran away with a lover, but now it seemed more likely she had followed the wrong voice, that she had followed the antlers through the underbrush, that she had become part of the forest, a secret among roots and leaves. Ismail found in his grandfather's old papers drawings identical to the ones the children had made. Same pattern, same monster. That wasn't coincidence, it was pattern, cycle, something the forest fed generation after generation. And the scariest part, it was as if the creature was learning, becoming more subtle, more present, more human each time, more familiar. And if you think a trauma disappears with time, think again. Some traumas are transmissible, like an old whisper passed from mouth to mouth, like a story no one wants to tell, but the monster insists on repeating. Before science, logic, and modern psychology, there was instinct, and instinct said, don't go that way. The ancient peoples knew, not because they read, but because they felt. The native elders spoke of forest spirits, of beings that took on forms, not to deceive, but to teach or punish. And among them, two names always echoed with sacred weight, Wendigo and Skinwalker. Neither was just a creature, they were curses. Wendigo was hunger. Not hunger for food, hunger for soul, for humanity. A corrupted spirit, born of desperation, of greed. It was what remained of a man who broke bonds with his own, who devoured his own people. It became something tall, skeletal, with antlers like a crown of shame. The Skinwalker, on the other hand, was disguise, a sorcerer who traded light for power, capable of wearing animal skins and stealing voices. They were never seen as legends, but as avoided realities. Elias, after everything he had seen, began to dive into these stories. He read books he only found in dusty secondhand shops, spoke with old shamans from isolated communities. One of them, slow-speaking and deep-eyed, said, "You didn't see a creature. You stepped where the forest keeps its weight, where the spirits still keep watch." From then on, Elias understood. What he encountered wasn't a monster. It was a message. He began adopting ancient practices, candles lit every night, preferably white or red, coarse salt at the doors, herb ashes in hand-sewn pouches, spiritual protections, simple but old spells. The neighborhood healer said, "It's not about banishing, it's about respecting." And Elias learned not to invade anymore, to ask permission from the forest in a low voice before entering. In certain rituals, he burned sage leaves, walking carefully through the house. He spoke ancient words even without understanding them. It was as if the smoke connected his reality with the world of the entities. The line between visible and invisible grew thinner, and the fear changed. It ceased to be paralyzing and became reverence, a kind of ancestral respect for something greater. He also used stones, onyx, obsidian, black tourmaline. He said they were shields against dense energies. Placed one under his pillow and another in his pocket when going out. One night, he dreamed that the Wendigo passed by him without stopping, just looked, as if recognizing something, as if saying, "Now you understand." He woke up sweaty, but at peace. It was as if, by honoring the ancients, he had earned time. He spoke with a woman descended from Lakota elders. She explained that the Wendigo is a human reflection, that it only appears where there is rupture, where the spirit drifts from the community. That's why it returns to families, she said. Because where there's silence and disunity, it feeds. Elias thought of his own, the arguments, the isolation, and he understood that the monster wasn't the problem, it was the symptom. Some nights, he left a candle burning and a bowl of water and salt near the window. They called this spiritual vigil. He believed that, in doing so, he showed he was aware, that he didn't want to fight, only coexist, a kind of truce with the invisible. After all, you don't defeat what can't be touched, but you can negotiate with humility, with ritual, with faith. He returned to the forest only with local guides, always accompanied by someone who knew the paths, not the ones on maps, but the spiritual ones. On one of these visits, he left offerings, tobacco, dried corn, crow feathers, small gestures, but full of intention. He felt the wind shift, that the silence on that day was different, not oppressive, but watchful. The forest accepted. Among the rituals, he learned to listen more than speak. The elders said the spirits manifest first as feeling, unexplained anxiety, a weight on the shoulders, a ringing in the ears. Elias began to respect each sign. He stopped, breathed, stepped back when his body asked him to. Instinct, after all, is the language of the supernatural. Elias no longer saw himself as a victim, but as a guardian of an ancestral secret. He knew many would mock the candles, the stones, the rites, but he also knew it was these simple things that kept the balance, that protected him from the return. Because the Wendigo, the Skinwalker, the fear with antlers, was still out there, just waiting for a new opening. And if one day you enter the forest, bring something beyond courage, bring respect, bring silence, maybe bring a candle, and a little salt. Because what lives among the trees doesn't want to destroy you, it just wants to be remembered, with reverence. Surviving the supernatural is different from surviving an accident or a common tragedy, because it's not just about what happened, but what remained. Elias discovered this in small moments, when he left the light on without realizing it, when he stopped walking just because he noticed the silence around him. It wasn't ordinary fear, it was living memory. The Wendigo, the Skinwalker, weren't just legends, they were experiences that shaped his way of existing. Each day, he created small safety rituals, checking doors, leaving a bit of salt water in the corners of the house, carrying a piece of iron in his pocket. Superstition? Maybe. But it was also strategy. Elias understood. Surviving wasn't forgetting. It was adapting. It was finding ways to continue, even while feeling deep down that something still watched him. Always from a distance, always in silence. Others did the same. Bianca, for example, started going back to church, but now it wasn't just faith, it was a shield. She prayed for protection, not for salvation. She had nightmares almost every night, but found in the routine of prayer a way to order the chaos. Cousin Louisa learned to paint. She said that when she put the creature on paper, it stopped appearing in her dreams. Each one found their invisible weapon. Ismail isolated himself for a while, but later realized that silence was the monster's territory. He began recording videos, speaking openly, even if people mocked him. He started a channel. He told his story like someone shouting into a dark valley, hoping that someone somewhere would answer, "I saw it too." And sometimes they did. They did. With short messages, timid accounts, small sparks of connection in the dark of doubt. Survival, in these cases, isn't measured in heartbeats. It's measured in the courage to remember, in the strength to sleep with the light off, in facing the forest within, even without stepping on the trails again. The trauma hides in the details. A dry antler on the road, the smell of meat in the woods, a distant echo that sounds too much like a familiar name. And in those moments, they breathe deeply and go on. Some chose to leave, to live in big cities where concrete muffles the call of the woods. Others, like Elias, stayed, but with a different gaze, the gaze of someone who's seen too much, who walks with caution, who respects the forest like an old temperamental lady, capable of welcoming, but also of devouring, and sometimes of whispering with voices that have no mouth. Naty, the husky from the first story, aged differently. She carried in her body and gaze an animal wisdom, still got scared by certain sounds, avoided mirrors and dark places, but she was vigilant, a reminder that instinct never lies. Her owner, now older, said the dog was her spiritual compass. If Naty refused to enter a place, she wouldn't either. What united all these survivors was the shared silence, the certainty that something existed, that the world wasn't made only of what eyes can see. And even with fear, even marked, they carried on. Not because they forgot, but because they endured. Because living after a brush with the supernatural takes more than courage, it takes purpose, and a kind of faith that doesn't fit into any religion. Each of them learned to listen better, to the body, the dreams, the winds. They learned to distinguish the silence of peace from the silence of warning. And they began teaching that to their children, their nieces and nephews, to the few willing to listen. Not as a threat, but as wisdom, as a code, a legacy. Because knowing there's something out there changes everything, forever. Elias still dreams of the creature sometimes, but now in the dreams, he doesn't run, he watches, recognizes, and wakes up stronger, because the monster no longer has dominion, only presence. And that changes everything. Fear becomes memory, memory becomes strength, and strength becomes resistance. Those who survive an encounter with the supernatural begin live with one foot in each world, the real and the invisible. They learn to move between the two with care, learn to see what others ignore, and deep down, know they're never alone. Because those who carry that kind of memory never truly walk alone again. And if one day you feel the wind suddenly change, the sound disappear, and the smell of the world turn sweet and rotten at the same time, listen, it may not be the end. It may just be the beginning of a silent survival. Now tell me, after all this, do you think these stories are just fiction? Or maybe deep down, you felt something strange too? That unexplained chill, that silence that feels too heavy, that whisper that seemed to come from inside your mind? What matters most isn't being afraid, it's respecting what fear is trying to show you. Maybe you've never crossed paths with a Wendigo or seen a Skinwalker, but the question that lingers is, what if one day it happens? Would you know how to survive? Which of these stories got to you the most? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share it in the comments. And hey, don't let this die here. If this content made you think, feel, or even shiver a little, then it did its job. But to keep receiving stories like this that open your mind and chill your soul, subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell. Because believe me, this was only the beginning.